If you're living within the borders of Kenya, you wake up to a very different Kenya. A Kenya where there's excitement because in the horizon we can see change. The change you have waited for such a long time. Now on my show today, I will tackle the very controversial issue of the abductions we have seen recently of GenZs and young Kenyans, whom the government suspects are deeply involved in the current Gen Z revolution. Just yesterday, Sunday, a Kenyan from Bonde la Ufa, a man called Shadrack Kiprono, or Shad, was abducted in South B, very close to Nairobi CBD, and is not the only one. In the last few days, Dr. Austin Omondi and a man called Billy Simani, or Crazy Nairobian, have also been abducted and then later released. But as I was coming in to make this video, Shad, or Kiprono Shadrack, had not yet been released. And of course, Kenyans who are very woke right now are demanding that the government release him immediately and that they stop these abductions. As we predicted in my previous video, the government has moved to that place where they're making desperate decisions. And of course, these decisions are deadly. Folks, what is happening in our country at the moment is that the revolution triggered or started off by the Gen Zs is rapidly gathering momentum. And the very strange thing is that the government is helping that momentum to pick up even faster. Stay with me and find out exactly how they're aiding the revolution against themselves. The abduction of Shadrack Kiprono, or Shad, was very visibly captured on CCTV camera, and it showed us the methods being used by the police, or shall I say government agents, methods that are obviously outside the law. Okay, it is illegal, and the evidence of this illegality was very clearly captured on camera. Now, to be fair to the Ruto regime, this abduction started during the presidency of number 3, Emilio Stanley Moi Kibaki. Okay? And these abductions are really the government behaving badly, but wanting to hide the fact that they're behaving badly, breaking the law, in fact. Now, there are certain instances where this kind of behavior has been a little excusable. And this is in the fight against terror, national security issue, where the lives of innocent Kenyans are at stake. And intelligence reports indicate that a certain individual is very involved in an upcoming terror attack. And in such instances, one would begin to understand why police would want to behave like this. However, in this instance, these are young Kenyans. They are definitely not a threat to anybody's life. Although admittedly, in this instance, they are a threat to the dictatorial, draconian, terrible Ruto regime. Surely that would not justify kidnapping people, abducting people, Kenyans, who have committed no other crime but their civic duty. They're Kenyans and they're protesting. They are well within the constitution and the law. They've not broken any law. But what should really interest Kenyans about this latest trend is that it is clear evidence that the government is still fishing. You know, when you're fishing, you have no idea what is under the water. You're fishing to catch something, anything. And so what this is telling us is the government still has no idea, no inkling of an idea of what is going on with these GenZs. Now, that is super fascinating. And it tells you that our intelligence service, the intelligence community in Kenya, were caught napping. They have no idea. They have no information. Does this speak to the incompetence? Actually, no. In fact, it reveals another big failure of the Ruto regime. Let me explain. The intelligence service of the country will work best with very minimum interference, actually no interference at all, from the executive and the political class. We know for a fact that the Ruto presidency has been interfering, directing the intelligence service. And in this particular case, very unfortunate for them, this has come back to bite them big time. You see, the way this interference works is that they receive direction from the executive. Indeed, now we can understand why Ruto could not work with the immediate former head of intelligence, who was a very professional man. He could not have accepted this. And so after they take direction from His Excellency and they go for a meeting, and one of the intelligence officers at this meeting is asked what they have, and they respond in the following way: I'm following up on the GenZs in Kenya. We know that this generation has had a huge impact in other parts of. They have forced governments out of power in West Africa, and they have triggered major unrest, and even before he can finish, he is cut short very quickly. Ati nini? Gen Z ni nini? Hiyo ni mama yako? This is Kenya, my friend. Don't waste your time on that useless research. Do something more useful. We want to know, for example, what Raila is doing, what he's planning, what he's thinking. Give me that, then I'll know you're serious. My friend, this is Kenya. Do you know the history of Kenya? Such things cannot happen in Kenya. Gen Zs in Kenya? That can never happen. Something like that. And now it has come back to bite them big time. Anyway, one can recover from their mistake. It is possible to recover very quickly and to get ahead of the situation. However, the Ruto regime is still blundering, because abducting people to try and get information, in my opinion, is a big blunder. You see, the train has already left the station. The horse has already bolted out of the stable. It is too late. Instead of focusing on trying to find out who left the stable door open, who released that dangerous train, should you not be rushing to the next stop where this train is due to arrive, and you get ahead of the situation in that way? Because at that station, you're dealing with issues before that train arrives there. That's how you deal with it. But what is the Ruto regime doing? It is still fishing. Trying to find out who is financing this thing. Where did it start? How did it start? It's too late for that. In any case, that can be done later. There are other more urgent things that should be on their plates right now. They're just making things worse. For themselves especially, but also for all of us. In fact, if truth be told, this government has a much bigger problem right now than the Gen Zs they're trying to investigate. And what is that problem? The problem is, things in Kenya were already so hot. I believe we've said this in so many countless videos on this channel. And all that people were waiting for was a trigger. That trigger happened to be the Gen Z protests against Finance Bill 2024. And this trigger has already triggered everybody in the country. Older Kenyans, much older Kenyans, everybody is behind this revolution that has been triggered by the Gen Zs. An intelligent government would be very concerned the way these parents of the Gen Zs are talking. You'd expect them to be very concerned about the safety of their young ones. But is that what they're saying? Of course not. These older Kenyans are talking about supporting the young ones, supplying water, supplying money, supplying moral support, etc., etc. And some are even telling us they will be there alongside their kids. That is what should worry the government. Because you know what that means? It means that everybody is in the mix. And it just doesn't make any sense that you're still fishing around getting information on these Gen Zs when everybody has joined in. Does that make any sense to you? Yesterday, Kenyans in the United States of America demonstrated outside the Kenyan embassy in Washington, D.C. And we are told many other similar protests are going to follow in Europe, the US, and elsewhere. Now, it should not be breaking news that Kenyans in the diaspora are super influential. They're very influential. And already they're giving moral and financial support to this revolution. And there you are, still fishing around, youngsters. What? And abducting innocent Kenyans, which obviously is going to make things worse, because people are rallying around these people. In fact, what the government is doing, it's inciting people to be more angry. It's inciting people to go to the streets. That is the crazy situation in the motherland right now. The mission of Ruto's police is to look for the leaders of this revolution. But actually what they are doing is that they are appointing leaders for this revolution. I mean, just last week, who had heard of Dr. Austin Omondi? Very few Kenyans. But now he's famous. He is one of the people who was abducted and then released. How many Kenyans had ever heard of Billy Simani? Crazy Nairobian, the blogger. Not very many. But now the whole of Kenya knows him. The youngsters will look up to him for inspiration and maybe even direction. The government is helping the Gen Zs to remove the same government. That is really what is happening. And in case you didn't know, people in our intelligence service are very qualified. They're able, they're capable. But what is happening? Political interference. So people have to survive. They have to protect their jobs by following orders. And we all know that Ruto is a micromanager. He is indeed the real boss of the intelligence service and everything else in Kenya. But now, the game has really changed for Ruto, because he is also exposing himself big time. He gives a speech in Nyahururu saying that he's proud of the Gen Zs and the way they have come together to fight for their rights. He is ready to negotiate with them. And when he's making this speech, just a few hours after Shadrack Kiprono, Shad, had been abducted by his government, his people. And so immediately Kenyans know that when Ruto gives a speech, he's not serious. He is not being truthful, because what he's saying is the opposite of what he is really doing. That has come out very clearly. Granted, politicians the world over do that all the time. But then for this to work, there is one golden rule that can never be broken. And that is, thou shalt not be caught. But Ruto has been caught. It is all over. That's really what it is. And there is a lot more that the government should be very worried about. Former Baringo Governor Gideon Moi has been very quiet. Extremely quiet. People have been asking, where did Gideon Moi go? What did Ruto do to Gideon Moi? Because the two have always been bitter political rivals. And many times we have seen that rivalry even become personal. So people are asking, what did Ruto do to Gideon Moi? And then suddenly, over the last 3 days, Gideon Moi has released no less than 2 separate statements. Gideon Moi is breathing fire. Now, in his latest statement a few hours ago, he has come out very strongly against these abductions. He has called them deeply troubling. He has wondered why the government is breaking the law. Because, Gideon Moi says, if somebody is suspected of any wrongdoing, there is a procedure of how to deal with them. A legal one. You arrest them and you present them in a court of law. You don't abduct them. Now I can read your mind. At least some of you. You're saying, Gideon Moi has got no political influence. He is not an elected leader. So what is the big deal if Gideon Moi, after so many months of being quiet, comes out and starts releasing statements? Hapo hakuna kitu. There is no big deal. Are you sure? Please consider the following. Gideon Moi is one of the wealthiest Kenyans in the country. Isn't that correct? And it is even more troubling that Gideon Moi would come out and issue a statement and his political influence is limited. That is very disturbing. It should be very disturbing to the government. Let me put it this way. Put yourself in the shoes of a very wealthy man in Kenya today. You own various businesses. Would it make any sense for you to stick out your neck and say something against the government of the day? Would that make any sense to you? Of course not. Your focus is on your businesses, and therefore you support the government of the day. If you have any issues, you keep quiet. What the younger Moi is doing should be a very clear indication that the rich and influential in Kenya are fed up with the Ruto government. Now, that is not a small thing, because money is influence. Money can easily bring down a government. Actually, there is a much deeper story here, so that we completely understand what I'm trying to say here. And let us start with the very first government of Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta was the president. When this government took over, they identified a threat to the stability of that government. And that was the rich Mzungus. Most of them were living in Karen, who at the time were controlling the Kenyan economy. That was definitely a threat to the Kenyatta presidency. And so how did they deal with it? This is exactly how corruption started, by the way. It started as a noble, patriotic cause to Africanize the economy. And that is how members of the Kiambu Mafia, who were paupers, most of them, when Jomo Kenyatta became president, suddenly became very wealthy. People like Dr. Njoroge Mungai. Bwana Mungai arrived at Stanford University, an Ivy League university in the United States, without a single coin in his pocket. He was on a partial scholarship, but he had nothing. And he worked his way through university into becoming a doctor. And Njoroge Mungai qualified and came back as Dr. Njoroge Mungai. but he had nothing. But this uncle of Uhuru Kenyatta, the fourth president of Kenya, by the time he passed on, was a very, very stinking wealthy Kenyan. Same story with Mbiko Nange and others. And when Daniel Toroitich arap Moi took over, same story. They identified the wealthy Kikuyus, members of the Kiambu Mafia, as a threat to the Moi presidency. And so what did they do? They did exactly what Kenyatta had done. And a number of Kalenjins suddenly became very wealthy. Mwai Kibaki, rinse and repeat. William Samoei Ruto. You will remember Ruto during his campaigns was talking about dynasties. And so what his government has done is what Jomo Kenyatta did, what Moi did. But this time round, it is on steroids. Yani the speed at which people are becoming wealthy, or the speed at which people have become wealthy, Akina Sudi, etc., etc. And we've all seen this with our very own eyes. People have changed. And some of these characters have gotten into a situation where the money is itching in their pockets. Yani pesa inasumbua kwa mfuko. It has to come out and go somewhere. It is too much money. That is what is happening. And you know, when people are making money at this speed, what will end up happening is that they'll come into confrontation with the people who already have the money. And that is precisely what has happened. And so today the wealthiest Kenyans, trust me, are fed up with the Ruto presidency. And that is dangerous. And it does not matter that a lot of Ruto boys and girls are now very wealthy. Because I believe we all know, when new money fights against old money will always win. And so, you can be sure that Gideon Moi's constituents at the moment, oh yes, he has constituents, are the rich and powerful in Kenya today. They are the ones who are speaking through the mouth of Gideon Moi. And let me remind you that a rich man can do a lot of things to destabilize a government. And he can do all those things without calling a press conference. He can do all of them chini ya maji. For example, if they control a certain industry, or if 2 or 3 billionaires control a certain industry, they can come together and decide to cause a shortage of some vital commodity in the country. Can you imagine the effect in the country called Kenya, with this very, very shaky government surviving one day at a time? Can you imagine if suddenly we have a shortage of milk, or bread, or spare parts for vehicles? Can you imagine the impact it would have, taking our current environment in the country? And I'm sure you get the idea now. You may hate rich people with everything you have, but that does not change the fact that they can do real damage in a country. They can cause a government to leave power in a second. As a government, you don't want to mess around with those people. You don't. But it should be clear by now that the arrogant regime of Ruto has never seen that. Right from day one, they started off bullying these billionaires. People like Macharia of Royal Media were summoned to State House. Fascinatingly, this same billionaire recently announced that he had shut down his insurance company. Now, this insurance company of his insures over 90% of the public transport vehicles in the country. All matatus, virtually all of them, have taken out the insurance with this company. And therefore what followed his announcement was hardly surprising. The insurance authority in the country announced you're not allowed to close your insurance company. You cannot do that. You don't have the power to do that. But hold on a minute. This push and pull, don't you think there's a story there? Let me just leave it there. But maybe I can give you a small additional tip. You know, as a billionaire, you can get so frustrated by a government that you decide to take a drastic step. I'm sure you get what I'm driving at. Yani, you do your sums and you realize that your business is no longer viable. So what do? You have to do something drastic. Shut it down. After all, you're not a poor man. You will not starve because you closed just one of your many companies. And meanwhile, the government, which is in deep sleep, does not even realize that if this person closes a company, so many Kenyans will end up unemployed. And we have that problem in the country. There are no jobs. And you're busy finishing off the few jobs that are there. So, what should we expect next? I believe the Ruto government will do more and more desperate things to stay in power. We've already seen one move of desperation, abducting GenZs all over the place. There are many more to follow. You know, this government is much more desperate than most Kenyans realize. I have no idea why the media has not highlighted the UDA legislators, the UDA Damu legislators, who last week voted no against the finance bill. And one of them is Juja MP, George Ndungu Koimburi. Now, Bwana Koimburi, or Honorable Koimburi, recently told us something very interesting. He revealed that all members of parliament who voted yes were being given bribes of Kenya shillings 2 million each. 2 million Kenya shillings to vote yes. Now, that information is not coming from a blogger. That information is not even coming from an investigative journalist. No. It is inside information because it is coming from a legislator right inside parliament who voted no. Okay? And therefore did not get the 2 million Kenya shillings. I am telling you, this is indeed the season of exposure. Because it is true, we have known all along that MPs receive money to vote in a certain way. That is not breaking news. But this one is different. At a time when Kenyans are waking up, we now have evidence, solid evidence, that actually MPs were given money. And not only that, we know the exact amount of money they were given, each, for voting yes. Kenya shillings 2 million. But even more significant, we now have a trend where UDA MPs are turning against Ruto. From where I sit, that is a very major development. Because, did you know that UDA MPs are terrified of Ruto? They are so scared of Ruto. So much so that if one has not made proper arrangements to get rid of the water in their body, it is very easy to accidentally urinate on yourself. Because of this terror, this fear they have for Ruto. But despite that, it seems that some UDA politicians are now saying, enough is enough. The fear is gone. For some of them. Others this Thursday will have to decide who to fear more, Ruto or angry Kenyans, their constituents. They will be forced to make that decision. I predict some of them may decide not to turn up, which, by the way, is also a vote. If you're on the UDA side and you don't turn up, you've actually voted no. And if you're on the opposition side and you don't turn up, you've voted yes. That should be clear. Nakwambia kumedhuka. Never forget that panic and desperation usually leads a human to do terrible things they would never have done under normal circumstances. Now, very quickly before I go, in my previous video, I spoke about Joey's dad, actually his late dad, who has always held on firmly to the belief that his son is completely innocent. Well, I have a very sensitive, actually two very sensitive special reports that reveal who the real killers and the real killer of the late Monica Kimani is highly likely to be. You don't want to miss this crazy information. You know, very early on, shortly after this murder of Monica Kimani that shocked Kenyans, I released some very sensitive information to a limited audience then. I believe this was in 2018, and I was going through that information and I was shocked at the accuracy of that information and how things panned out, because this was before anybody had been charged for the crime. At that time we only had suspects. Nobody had been taken to court yet. And that information tells you very clearly who the real murderer was, and solidifies the theory that Joey was simply framed, a fall guy. And this information names names, both the powers behind it and the person who executed it. Now, for the super curious and the people who want to know, about only 20 people tops are making available to them these highly sensitive special reports. Actually, there are two of them for only $15 or Kenya shillings 1,999. And therefore, if you're interested in knowing the sad thing that happened to Joey, because it could happen to anybody, you can use the information you see on your screens right now to get your hands on this crazy information. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.